happening? What is happening? All right,
That is some true life advice from Will Terry.
That needs to go on our extras reel.
Okay. Let's knock this one out and be done with it, so we don't have to talk to each other anymore today. Okay, I'll bring us in. You know what? We should do a April Fool's one and switch it up one of these days.
Oh, that would be good. See if people notice.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to 3 Point Perspective, the podcast about illustration, how to do it, how to make a living at it, and how to make an impact in the world with your art. I'm Jake Parker.
I'm Lee White.
And I'm Will Terry. And all three of us are professional illustrators. And we've all been working for the past 25, 30 years, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years. Combined, I don't know how much time we have. We've all worked for all the major publishers. We published somewhere maybe around 100 books. And we've all taught illustration at the university level.
That is correct. Each week we're going to come up with a fascinating topic, better than all the other illustration podcasts. Sometimes we're going to argue, sometimes we're going to agree, but each time you are going to learn something super valuable.
Right. And you know what? There may be 3 other people who are way more qualified to do this podcast than we are, but we're what you got. So, and you're here listening to us. So
hey, we're good. We're getting popular enough where people are starting to say, hey, those guys don't know what they're talking about. Didn't you say?
That's a true sign of success.
I would hopefully what happens is our podcast ignites a fire under the 3 people who really are qualified.
Oh,
so
right.
They'll step up. You know, we've been waiting for you.
Because I would listen to that podcast.
I would too.
The problem is the 3 people who are most qualified don't have any rapport amongst themselves. They can't speak on camera. They're just like, they know a lot, but they can't talk about it. Well, we don't know anything, but we can talk about anything.
Okay, let me ask you this. I know we're already getting off topic, but let me ask you this. Who, if you could replace us with 3 illustrators, who would it be? Living or dead?
I'd say Norman Rockwell.
Wow.
Okay, so Norman Rockwell.
But see, I don't know if those guys were good at talking.
It doesn't matter. They'll find a groove. They'll get into it. They could talk. So you pick Norman Rockwell.
Well, then I would go with an obvious. If NC Wyeth is good at podcasting, I'd probably go with him.
Okay, so
there's a lot of things that I would want to know.
Okay,
yeah,
I would pick Maurice Sendak. So 3 Point Perspective with Maurice Sendak, Norman Rockwell, and NC Wyeth. That would be quite a show.
That would be.
All right, now let's do the living version.
Let's do the crappier version, which is Lee White, Jake Parker, and Will Terry.
This is what you got.
Now, this is what you got. This is the living illustrator version. All right. Today's topic is Lee's subject. So I'm going to let him take it away, and here we go.
Let's dive in. Do we need to mention that Will's calling he's not using his normal professional Howard Stern level microphone. He's on you're just on your iPhone, right?
On my iPhone, yeah.
That's right. Okay, Will is out of the studio. He's calling in from his phone. So if there's any sort of degradation in the audio sound on that part, just roll with it. We're doing the best we can under the circumstances.
Yep.
Take full credit.
Okay, go, Lee.
Our topic today.
Wait, hold on, Lee. Go now.
Our topic today is everybody's on pens and needles now, wondering what it is. It's on illustration assignments, and the reason for that is, we've had a bunch of podcasts where we talk about making better work and what kind of portfolio to have and what to include in your portfolio, but we never really talk about the illustration assignments themselves. And so hopefully my goal was to leave you guys with some grain that maybe you can use to start some new work or to flesh out a new portfolio. We talk about style. If you're like, okay, I want to do this new style, but I really don't know what to draw and paint, maybe this episode will help you out there. That sound interesting enough,
Sounds
you guys?
good.
I like it.
Yeah.
All right. So before we're going to go into my thought was some of our favorite assignments that we've given in the classroom. What's really interesting to me, and I'd like to hear Jake and Will's take on this, is that as a whole, illustration assignments, I mean, there's part of the responsibility is on the student, obviously if you're going to do good work or bad work, but there's a lot of responsibility on the assignment itself. And have you guys had classes where you assign something and the whole class sort of flops and you're like, oh yeah, that assignment was kind of faulty?
It took, because I taught at UVU for 9 years, and it probably took about 4 or 5 to finally get my assignments where I felt like the rules were semi-foolproof. But prior to that, the first 5 years, everything was like, no, not like this. Read my mind, you idiot.
So you're picturing a kind of result, and they're not delivering that result, and you're like, okay,
not
let's
at
do the
all.
assignment.
Or they're being, like we talked about earlier, they're for some reason looking for loopholes to get out of actually doing the assignment. So in other words, they knew what we were trying to go for, but they took advantage of the lack of parameters,
But doesn't that contradict what you've said on another podcast? I'm going to push your buttons today because I want us to argue.
Oh boy.
But you said before, like, you use every assignment to kind of weasel yourself into it. How do you make the distinction between those two things of what you're talking about there? Because there is a distinction.
You mean when I was a student, I tried to do that? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I mean, we had another episode. I remember we were talking about it, and like we were saying that the goal, anytime you get an assignment, is like, okay, how can I do the assignment and also get what I need to get out of it? You know what I mean?
Gotcha,
like, how do you sort of tweak it? So are you saying that's different?
Yeah. So the difference is what I'm talking about in trying to get out of an assignment is maybe it's your intent on how much to work. So the person trying to get out of the assignment is trying to decrease their workload, and they don't care about the result. And the person who is trying to make it their own and tweak the rules to their benefit doesn't care how much time it takes, because they're committed. They're going to spend all the time it takes, and they're really concerned with the end result. So they're completely polar opposite ideas.
Yeah, that's a good distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I want to I agree with that 100%, by the way. So I want to start out with some of the just bad assignments that we got as when we were students, or maybe bad assignments that we've given, maybe just a couple. One of the ones that I'm going to pick on in art school, because there are some bad assignments and you can waste a lot of time in school, and maybe we'll disagree on this too, but the self-portrait, what is going on with the self-portrait in art school? I mean,
that's the one I was thinking about.
There's like 10 of, I did like 10 of them, like, okay, this is a self-portrait in black and white. This is a self-portrait with me made out of fruit. This is a self-portrait with, I mean, it was every version of a self-portrait.
I think what's going on there is it's easier. Like what I think what's at the core of it is they want you to do a portrait, and for lack of, having to, track down a person, nail a person down for a couple of hours to sit for you, it's just easier to say, let's do a self-portrait. Because I'm willing to bet that assignment came out of, I couldn't finish it because I couldn't get anybody to sit for 3 hours.
Can I give you my take on why teachers do lazy assignments?
Sure.
Because they're lazy.
Boom, Will Terry throwing out the
Here's the thing
gauntlet.
though. and so one, they don't know what to do, because it's not easy to generate a good assignment. You really have to do a lot of soul searching, a lot of thinking, a lot of trial and error, and you have to really care about your students. And I think one of the problems with our system is you're going to get paid. And this is especially true in art, because results are not, this is my theory, results are not trackable by the average college administrator. So in other words, everyone knows if you're getting, if a student is thriving in math and English and science and all those things, they're trackable. Either your testing is good or your testing is bad, your writing is good or your writing is bad. But with art, especially in fine art, it's, well, this is what I do, like, so I think teachers, I think teachers, bad teachers especially, can hide in colleges because no one's looking, no one's tracking, no one's accountable. And so it's easy. You're going to get paid the same whether you give the self-portrait assignment or whether you spend, the next 3 to 5 years trying to develop your own really good assignments.
So you're saying the self-portrait is sort of just filler for most teachers, you think?
I think so. Yeah.
I just hate it. Then the only criteria for success on the self-portrait is, does it look like you? And then it just feels so goofy.
Yeah.
Even painting them feels really goofy because you got the mirror and you're looking up, but you're trying to paint yourself at an angle, and
Right.
so it's just,
Right.
it's so goofy.
Let me be clear. I've met tons of really good teachers who in college who knock it out of the park. It's just that I think what you're talking about is that there are teachers that kind of just phone it in, and that's
Absolutely.
what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I don't know. And I also think, aside from that, I think there's just standing art assignments that have never been critically looked at for why are we doing this thing.
Right.
I mean, I sort of think that about. I think drawing the nude figure is good for a term or two. I think there's too much focus on it because you could draw anything. Like, I mean, ask the average college student to draw a vehicle. Just go out on the street and they cannot draw it. It's way hard. And people develop a shtick for drawing the figure to where they understand just the basic land so well, and they're almost not even having to try anymore. You know what I mean? There's only so many shapes you can move around in space.
No, that's a good point, because there's so emphasis on figure drawing, then they fill their portfolios with that, and they're astonished when they're like, like a future employer doesn't care about the figure drawings themselves. They want to see how does that knowledge translate to an illustration.
Right. At Art Center, there was a big push on, a big focus. Steve Houston was a teacher there, and Vilpu and all those guys in LA for these really pretty stylized, almost boxed lay-ins. Like the lay-in of drawing the figure became a thing in and of itself. For those guys, that's just a means to the end, which eventually becomes a finished painting or whatever. But this lay-in was really funny. So they had all these students who were doing these really pretty boxes and connecting the boxes together, and they almost look like robot people sort of. But then when the pose would get past like 15 minutes and there's no more boxes to draw, they would have no idea what to do, and they just sit there and draw that all day. But they get compliments and compliments. Yeah, for years they would draw those, and then, like you said, Jake, they would come time to show your final portfolio, and all they got are these lay-ins of these figures. It's kind of goofy.
Yeah.
Any other bad assignments that kind of you guys can remember?
I had a variation of the self-portrait. You're supposed to draw yourself as an animal.
Wow.
So what animal best represents you? But the animal actually had to look like you too. So it's like there's some artists that would like, okay, I'm just going to draw me as a cow and I'll do cow ears and horns, but it's my face,
Right.
And I don't know what I was just like, I'm not into this assignment at all. I want to create a portfolio that has cool concept art in it. So instead of the portrait, I drew 2 characters in an environment, and they were putting on jetpacks, and they were going to fly over to the city in the sky, right? And and there were these 2 animals. One was a raccoon, one was like a gazelle or something. And I drew myself as a gazelle. I just put my hairstyle on the gazelle with my eyes, and turned it in. And my teacher was just like, "This isn't what I asked for at all." And I was like, I don't care. I'm not trying to get a good grade. I'm trying to build a portfolio.
For some reason, when I hear that assignment, the only thing I think of is Thundercats. I can't think of any other.
Thundercats.
Don't know why. It's like the perfect combination of a human and an animal.
What's funny is that assignment would probably be a dream assignment for some people, which is kind of scary.
Let's give some extra credit. If anybody wants to post SVS or we don't have that post here. We should talk about our sponsor, SVSLearn. But I'd love to see all 3 of us as Thundercats if anybody has some extra time.
Oh, no.
People have drawn.
Which Thundercat would you be, Lee?
Don't say Snarf.
Will Terry's definitely a Panthro.
Lion-O, perhaps? I don't know.
You'd be Lion-O for sure. No, you'd be Wile E. Kit.
I don't even know that one. Is that one?
It's the two kids. It's one of the two kid ones.
Could I be like a chupacabra or something like that?
All right, moving on. We're really
another bad assignment. Another bad assignment is that life and death one for me. Is it?
Oh, what is that?
Just draw life and death. I've seen that one done so many times. So it's so vague.
Yeah.
That one, as a teacher, you're getting, and maybe there's good and bad. There's pros and cons to everything. So the good side is that you're forcing the students to be really creative. So let me just say that, defend it a little bit by saying that. But for me, the problem is that you end up getting you get really weird stuff that doesn't look like illustration. Excuse me. And it doesn't fit in a portfolio, and it outs itself when the student graduates. A lot of times if they leave it in their portfolio, it just looks like a student assignment. It doesn't look like a professional piece at all. And so I prefer to give assignments where the viewer of the portfolio can't tell if it was an actual job or not. And I think you can give those early on still, you can make them more simple,
right?
But you can make them so that a potential art director or an editor would look at them and go, "Oh, what was this for?"
Mm-hmm.
Not automatically like, "Well, I'm going to skip past that because that was obviously a student piece."
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I've never had the life and death one, but I had love and hate, and you had to put them in the same. Or no. Sorry, your biggest love, your biggest fear and love, and they had to be in the same illustration. So the same kind of thing. You're just really forcing two things, and it looked really forced. Sometimes really creative, but you're totally right. Like if I put that in a children's book portfolio, it would look so goofy. But can generate some cool stuff. All right, I'm going to segue because I'm going to start out with bad stuff. We mainly do books between us three, and the classes we teach deal with books. I want to talk about an assignment that I think is bad, sort of, and I'll segue into the good version of that as we get into the good assignments that you guys may want to try out. And that is the dummy. If you've ever taken a children's book class, especially an advanced children's book class, a lot of times you're going to be asked to make a dummy. I've done that in my book classes as well. Of course, like years ago, I would say that's a good assignment. Now I think it's a bad assignment.
Oh,
yeah. So? Jake perks up finally.
What?
Puts down the Cintiq. Puts down the stylus.
That's on Jake's list of one of the best assignments to give.
You're gonna have to change it up. Here, I'll justify. So you make a whole dummy. The typical thinking that goes into that is you make the whole dummy, you write a manuscript, or you get some pre-existing script, make the whole dummy, polish it up a little bit all the way through, then you polish up a couple of favorite illustrations, and then you paint those. And that's typically how a children's book illustration class works. The problem is the finish, and depending on how the finish looks, can change the nature of how the dummy is built. And so what I do now is I do go through and do some thumbnailing to get sort of like a rough script. Wouldn't call it a dummy yet. And then I go ahead and make a couple of finished pieces, and that's how I'm going to segue into the good ideas. Doing a dummy without trying out the finish is the bad portion of that, and that's kind of where I'll land with that. But so the three illustrations that I like to do now, if I'm going to do a book dummy, is I pick the hardest illustration in the whole manuscript. If there's a hard passage that I don't know how I'm going to do it or whatever, I'm going to focus on that one. I pick my favorite piece, the piece that I think is going to be the best illustration in the whole book. And then I pick a random one after that. So I do 3 pieces and I take them to full finish. And it's amazing how having those 3 pieces informs the building of a children's book dummy.
That's cool.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's cool, but would you have your class do that as an assignment?
Oh,
too?
Yeah, absolutely. I would have them pick, especially if the manuscript's already written, I would have them go ahead and do a couple of finished pieces, even if those pieces don't end up being in the finished dummy or the finished book. And the cool thing about having those finished pieces too is you can now talk intelligently with an art director, if they say, you're pitching your dummy and you got the finished pieces and you're saying, okay, this is why, this is driving this kind of design sensibility or this stylistic approach. One of the things that caused me to rethink that was I was working with an art director and I was doing full illustrations. This was for a book called Crazy Day at the Critter Cafe. I think it was like my 5th or 6th book. And my art director, I sent in full illustrations. So I was doing full scenes and it all takes place inside a restaurant for the most part. And they were normal scenes. They were quirky, like my normal style of quirkiness, but they were full scenes, you know what I mean? Like background, foreground, ground plane and walls and all that stuff. And she just kind of ripped, I submitted a couple of the illustrations and she completely cut out my backgrounds, and we then started treating the design work like a play where we're moving set pieces in, like a table or a chair or a countertop or whatever pertained to that particular scene, but the background was totally flat and there was no environment, if that makes sense. And so if that's going to be your finish, it would change the entire dummy. Whereas if you just start with the whole dummy, you're just going to draw it like you normally draw it.
Yeah, that's a good point to like take real life experience from how it actually works in reality and apply that to what would the assignment be that reflects that gets a student to be able to do that when they're faced with that in their career.
Right.
I think another thing that goes along with that is I've tried doing a book dummy as an assignment and it didn't work either. And part of the reason is because the story is almost never fleshed out. So it's a huge problem to have. So if your story isn't perfect and you start working the dummy, all it does is reveal all the problems in the story. I created a mess because I taught a children's book class, at the university, and the whole semester, the first time I kind of went in there going, this is going to be great. You guys are going to come out of here with a book dummy. And all the class really did was reveal how bad everyone was at writing. And they were all frustrated that I kept saying, well, this doesn't really work because you haven't, and without ever having tried to write a book, if you're listening to this and you haven't tried to write a children's book, it's much harder than you would think. You have to have and I'm not even good at it. That's another thing. So here's the blind.
If you haven't done a book dummy, it's a good point. If you haven't done a book dummy before, like drawn one out, you definitely don't want to do it with something that you're writing out, I would say.
Yeah. Right. And the problem with most illustrators are, and I'm including myself in there, is that we want to write the book so we can illustrate it. We don't want to write it for the writing's sake, usually.
Right.
And in order to write a good children's book, you have to be in love with the writing part as much as the illustrating part. And you have to spend so much time getting the writing completely finished. It has to be workshopped. It has to be critiqued. It has to be massaged. It has to be refixed and edited and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten until finally it's perfect. And then you start the book dummy. And it's almost impossible for most beginning author illustrators to actually give the story its due diligence. So
yeah, in my classes I never let people have the option of using their own writing.
I stopped doing that too. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just said pick a fairy tale, and then they started picking obscure ones that were dumb, and so.
Why were they dumb?
They would pick a story that just wasn't a good story somehow, and it was, and so I was like, you just pick a nursery rhyme, just redo a nursery. If you want to fracture it, you can fracture it, but it's got to have the story arc that will hold it together.
I did a variation of this for concept art class. So I taught for a few semesters. I taught concept art at BYU there, and I told them we're all going to do Wizard of Oz or we're all going to do Jack and the Beanstalk, and you guys could be creative within those boundaries. So you could do sci-fi Jack and the Beanstalk, you could do stuffed animal Jack and the Beanstalk, but it has to be that story. And you're going to need to design the giant. You're going to need to concept out what does a beanstalk look like? What does Jack look like? And the reason I did that is because I tried it once where I was like, okay, come up with a story that you need to concept out, and really they spend all this time thinking, what's the story? And the drawing's like the last thing, last thing
Right.
on their mind. Right.
Yeah, same idea. Totally same idea. All right. So what's some favorite assignments that you guys have either given or received as a student that generated good results for most of the class?
Yeah,
well, Draw
what's
50 Things
yours?
is actually the best assignment. Draw 50 Things is the best assignment you could ever give.
Okay. Please explain.
That's on my bad list, by the way. So
I know. Lee, I got to convert you. So here's the thing. In the attempt to get people to organize and design and compose an image, I found that students would they would eliminate things, they would leave things out, they would oversimplify in order to give themselves less work. And sometimes you can do that successfully, but other times, if the story or the narrative that you're trying to illustrate describes a lot of intricate detail, like let's say it describes a wizard shop and there were, cages and potions and, on and books and spells and, and this is this business, this place of business that's got all these items in there. It's going to be really hard to make it. It's funny because I had students I'd give that assignment and they would almost always default to making a wizard shop that looked like it had just been looted. Like all the stuff had just been stolen out and there was hardly anything in there, And I'm like, and the reason was they were not good at, I think we're not naturally good at overlapping objects. I don't think that we're naturally good at grouping objects together. And I think that when we design an image with a lot of stuff in it, one of the biggest things that happens is we lose the focal point. The focal point ends up being something random that just sort of happens because you don't know how to maintain your focal point. So the Draw 50 Things assignment, it is actually a class at SVSLearn.com, was designed so that you could learn how to, in the midst of chaos, still bring a lot of order and maintain emphasis, aka focal point, into your drawing. And I would work. I was teaching an imagination visual literacy class, which the whole semester was geared towards that one assignment. So where you might think you think it's a bad assignment because of how complicated it is. We worked the whole semester. I'm putting words in your mouth, right?
Yeah. I actually think it's a great. I'm totally kidding with you.
Okay.
I really do think it's a great assignment, and it is something that people struggle with, especially if it's something that you've noticed that people are naturally shying away from because it's hard.
Yeah, it is really hard.
And what that means is nobody's going to have that in your portfolio. So the whole idea, right, is that a good illustration assignment, you do it, it ends up in your portfolio, or a version of it ends up in your portfolio, and then you take it and you show it to somebody. And if you're showing something that 99% of the other people are avoiding because it's too hard, all of a sudden now you're going to get some interest from an art director or an editor, a publisher, or whatever. So I love it. I mean, I struggle with it too. I mean, I have no problem putting 50 items in a scene. I know how to control a focal point, but golly, it's just for my attention span. I know when I'm doing a 50 things drawing, because my whole book I'm working on right now is a 50 things drawing. Every drawing, every single spread is complicated. And I know that because my temperament is like all of a sudden I'll think that I need to organize my computer cables or some other like random task.
It's like, I feel like I need an omelet. Let's see. Oh, out of eggs. Better go to the grocery store.
Totally right.
But I will say that the images for your book, Lee, are amazing.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Because you've shown us. Yeah, they're great. And so you are good at it. And I know what you're saying. I think what you're saying is, that you're in for a long design session because it doesn't come super easy. Yeah.
See, I love that stuff. That's like my jam is cramming as much stuff into an image as possible. And the thing that I had two
sadistic.
I had two aha moments that got me to this point, and one was giving everything dimension. So it used to be that's like, oh, I don't want to draw a bookshelf. And so I draw like the flattest bookshelf, and I do just like vertical strokes. Like these are the books. And part of me was like, one day I was like, you know what, let's really draw each book as if it had dimension to it. And so by treating each book as like a rectangular three-dimensional object, I could go in there and push some books in and pull some books out. And I actually started like enjoying drawing these things because I made it fun to draw. Whereas before it was like, oh, it's this overwhelming thing. I just want to get it done as soon as possible. Now it's like, I'm drawing a book. Oh, I get to draw another book. Oh, I get to draw another book, and they're looking good together. And they're, I think what it was like, I'm building out this world like it actually exists and not just a backdrop. Like if you zoomed in close, you could, pull that book off the shelf and read it. Right. So that was one thing. The other one was just learning to break it down into not thinking, oh, I've got to draw all these 50 things, but I'm just drawing one object, or I'm drawing this group of objects here. And first they're going to be a blob, and I could turn this blob into smaller blobs. So over here is going to be a bookshelf. Okay, I'll just draw a blob. Okay, now this blob needs to be shelves. Okay, so that's easy. I can draw shelves. And now these shelves need to have little blobs on them that represent the books. Okay, blobs for books. Oh, I could turn these blobs for books into, actual books. And so just looking at it like that, like just one step at a time, turning blobs into something real is like so much easier for me than thinking I've got to do all 50 things.
Right.
And at the same time, just start on one side and work my way across.
No, I mean, that highlights exactly why this assignment is great, is that you figured out kind of your approach on it, and you figured out something that keeps your interest the entire time. I had to do the same thing with this because I didn't have precedent really. I've been doing simpler and simpler images. All of a sudden I'm confronted with a whole book of complicated images. And so the method I came up with sort of the same. I did big blobs for everything to just try to get the focal point right, what Will was talking about, whether that's color, emphasis by scale, emphasis by design, whatever. Get that big overall kind of simple design working. And then I would make mine into a plus, like quadrants, and I would black out 3/4 of the image so I can only see 25% of the image, and I would zoom in just on that 25% and then start just drawing what's in that little square. And it became so much more manageable and controllable. And then I would turn off that mask, every now and again, just to make sure everything's kind of working together. But you got to confront your demons with stuff like that. I think it's a solid assignment. I totally agree with Will there. So if you guys haven't tried that, you can come over to Will's class. He's got a video on that, and it's how many sessions is the video? How long is the video?
Offhand, I can't exactly remember.
Is it just one assignment though, or do you walk them through techniques? How do you teach that?
It's the one assignment, but it's broken down into steps. So it's basically just stepping you through.
Good.
And if you break anything down, like any big task you have, like just moving from an apartment to another apartment or to a house or something, it's a daunting task. Where do I start? And sometimes if you just say, I'm going to pack 3 boxes today of knickknacks, and then I'm done, and I get to go do something that I want to do. It's it takes away the daunting nature of it, So that's basically what I'm trying to do with that class, is say, first just concentrate on this, second just concentrate on this, that type of thing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's really good. Okay, so for those of you guys following, the first assignment that we gave option was, if you're doing a children's book, go ahead and, if you're doing a dummy, go ahead and do 3 finished pieces from it, the hardest piece, your favorite piece, and then any other random piece, just to make sure the dummy's going to work with what your finish is going to be. Next one is draw 50 things, and you can go onto svslearn.com if you want to see more about that. We're not trying to really push these classes. I promise this is not an ad, but we are taking, we've taught videos and we teach at different colleges and stuff. We're trying to take the best stuff that we have learned over time, and we do have some resources for it. So just letting you guys know that. All right, that's Will's first one. Jake, do you have a favorite assignment or anything that's generated the best results for?
Here's one. It's not like a huge undertaking, but when I give the assignment, when I have given it in the past, there's a lot of like, the eyes get big. Like, really? That's what you want us to do? And this is draw 50 hands. And so
people are now turning off our podcast. They're terrified from these assignments. Okay, go ahead.
So the thing is fill a page or several pages in your sketchbook with different hands, and what I'll give them is a reference sheet of a bunch of a bunch of animated hand model sheets, and they could use those for reference, or they can draw their own hands, or someone else can pose a hand for them. But it has to be 50 hands in 50 different poses, 50 different angles, whatever. And I show them, here's how you draw a hand. These are the basic like shapes. This is the anatomy of a hand, and go do it. And for some reason, sometimes students come back and they've drawn 20, 25 and just ran out of steam. But the ones that do all 50, they're like, at the end of this, I was actually like, I felt good about drawing hands. I felt more confident with it. And I felt like I understood what a hand is, instead of just, this thing that I try to avoid putting at the end of an arm, which is
right.
The reason for that too is like, I tell them too, like, you could really distinguish between the good artists and the so-so artists by how well those artists draw hands.
Right.
And the so-so artist is going to hide the hands. It's going to put them in pockets, going to put them behind the back. Or when they do draw them, you're going to look at it like, oh, were they in an accident, or
Right.
was it an afterthought? But the good artists embrace the hands. They use them to show emotion, to show expression from the character even more. And so that's why I give that assignment, is to get them to overcome that fear of drawing hands.
Right. I have a similar assignment like that. It's called Hide 50 Hands. I draw 50 characters with no hands.
That's a skill too. It's a legitimate skill.
Everybody's hands are just out of frame. I can't see them.
What's funny is I sat down because I'm writing a how to draw book right now it's like the Inktober handbook. And it's not just how to ink, but it's a lot of my like how to draw type of things. And one of the things is the assignment is to draw 50 somethings, like draw 50 hands, or if you're not good at ears, draw 50 ears, or if you're struggle with feet, draw 50 feet. And so for this, I was like, well, I need an image for this page. I guess I actually have to go draw 50 hands. And I was dreading it. I was putting it off until finally, like, well, this is due tomorrow. I better sit down and do this.
That's funny.
And I sat down for 2 or 3 hours one afternoon and pulled up all this reference, and I sat down and started drawing. And I saw me, who's been drawing for years and who is, somewhat okay, confident with my hand drawing abilities, seeing how much better I got after sitting down and doing that assignment.
That's
and
good.
Understanding things that I hadn't understood before. So I think that's an assignment not just for the younger artists, but someone who's more seasoned should probably sit down and try it.
I like it. That's good. I've never done that. That terrifies me. My characters keep getting smaller and smaller within my spreads and my images, and so I never get a chance to draw a hand. I mean, a hand is a dot if I'm lucky. You know what I mean? So I need to do some close-ups of some characters maybe. All right, I'm going to give you guys an assignment that will give you the keys to the universe.
Oh boy.
This will give you. This is the ingredients for Caldecott?
Oh, I'm listening.
I should listen to it because I haven't won it yet. So I'm not taking my own advice. Okay, this is my Chris Van Allsburg assignment. So one thing I noticed with Chris Van Allsburg is he has a shtick. And I was looking for an assignment that generates good results. As teachers, we want the whole class to perform well. And like I said earlier, you can...
Real quick, just remind people who Van Allsburg is.
Chris Van Allsburg is well, that's coming because it's part of where I'm going with it.
Right.
So Chris
Okay,
Van
great.
Allsburg's a famous illustrator. He's won multiple Caldecotts, but the basis of his storytelling is one little kind of angle, and that's the angle that I give for this assignment. And that is, for lack of a better, it's really inarticulate how I'm going to say this, but you take something out of its natural setting and put it somewhere else and magic ensues. So if you take the jungle and put it in a suburban neighborhood, you have Jumanji. If you take a house and put it in space, you have Zathura. If you take a train and you take off the tracks and put it in the North Pole, you have the Polar Express. And so if you look at it, at every book that he's done from that angle, just take one thing and move it to another setting where it's not expected, you get good results. That was my hypothesis. So I tested it on an illustration class, and man, oh man, it's crazy. You start to change, and you can change scale, you can change function, you can change whatever you want to there, but it has to be a recognizable item. I'll give you an example of one of my students who is now a teacher at SVS, Sean Keenan. He and I were doing an independent study together, and I tested it on him first as he's sort of my guinea pig. And we were doing portfolio level images, and that was the hypothesis. You have to move something to somewhere else where it doesn't go. And so we came up with the idea of these archaeologists who were digging in the ice and frozen tundra, and they came across these just mammoth scale ants. So it's these things that are normally small and definitely not in an ice environment, and we made them huge, 200-foot tall head, and these archaeologists and workers are all digging these things out. And man, we got probably 10 of the most interesting images I've ever seen just from that premise. And we didn't have to write a story or anything. It's like them basically uncovering the giant ant head, and then helicopters lifting this thing out of this environment, and it was amazing. It was amazing. And so if you just looked at Chris Van Allsburg's, his history and all his books and stuff, and see how he did that, if you've read The Wreck of the Zephyr, that was one of my favorite Van Allsburg's books.
Yeah,
I love that one.
Same thing.
So good.
Same exact thing. It's all good. And so it's sort of a no miss kind of illustration assignment, even though it's quite broad. It tends to work really well. It'll at least start to generate images that I think are important, because whatever item you move to its location that shouldn't be, you take it out of its normal setting, whatever you decide to do, it's going to be unique to you. And when an art director sees that, I guarantee you they will have never seen it before. And it's hard to do unless you use this secret formula that I just gave everyone. I just want a little cut of all your career payouts from the success you're going to have. But seriously,
nothing is free, guys. Nothing's free.
But it's weird when you give an assignment and the entire class does it, and everybody's images are all of a sudden elevated. Those are the kind of assignments that all of a sudden I start to pay attention to, because it changed the whole group, not just the one good kid in class or the two good kids. It changed everybody.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's super cool. That's cool. I actually, you like gave me. That is, in a nutshell, what Chris Van Allsburg is. And it made me realize, like, oh, it's so simple. It's like, right. It's deceptively simple.
Oh, now the curtain's been pulled back, right? It's like a magic trick. And if you don't know the trick, it looks hard, but it's not rocket science.
Right.
So Caldecotts should be coming for everybody.
That's right. Yep. All right. I'll have you in my acceptance speech.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Is there an acceptance speech for Caldecott?
There is. I think all this stuff happens. Yeah, all this stuff happens if you win it. I don't know much about it because I'm just disgruntled.
Well, so you give your speech at the summer ALA, American Library Association convention.
Right.
In front of a ballroom of, a banquet room of like 1,000 people.
Oh.
So it's pretty cool. I've watched
Great.
a couple of them. That's why I
terrifying.
watched Brian Selznick give his talk. He gave an amazing talk. I was going to say something else and I forgot.
Who wants to take the reins? You got another assignment, Will?
Yeah,
I've got
let's
one.
hear it, Will.
How about fixing DeviantArt characters? So towards the end of the semester, I have done drawovers for my students on their characters, and I flip the table and say, okay, now it's your turn. So I have figured out how to get the worst images off of DeviantArt. And what you do is you search. You have to change the filter so that you get more current uploads.
Okay, so
Because
just
the way
time based.
Yeah, the site will automatically curate for the best over time. So you want to get out of that default, and you want to go over to the current slop that's being uploaded from the junior high kids that day, which for them is amazing. I want to state that, but obviously there's going to be a difference in skill level between junior high and college, and so hopefully college kids can take what they've learned and take some of these characters and fix them. And by fixing someone else's mistakes, it'll help you learn how to draw. So, I would have my students do that and go over them, and then I would look at their work, and then I would do a draw over as well and say, this, I think you got this right. Here's another thing that I would do differently. And a lot of times it's just the mechanics of the drawing, I think people tend to draw characters flat. A lot of times their perspective is off. So you'll see like where the belt goes around, that ellipse won't match the same perspective as pant legs. The camera angle is got conflicting things. And another big common mistake is that they don't put the character in a 3-dimensional space. So it ends up looking like an Egyptian drawing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you draw and you pull things out, and you make, one leg bigger than the other, things like that.
Yeah,
Just
that's good.
How
did it work? Were the results solid? Did people learn better?
It works well because I can tell, even though they don't often do a really great draw over, they are making some improvements, or they're at least trying. They can see where the problems are, and that's really what I want them to see is, where the problems are. And that would be a daily assignment. That would be an assignment that I give during class,
Right.
and it would just be like a participation type assignment. So small little thing, exercise to go through.
I do like that. One of the things that's missing from a lot of classes, especially if you guys watch a lot of YouTube demos, is what happens when things go wrong. And that what you're saying, Will, is sort of a version of that. Is like you now have to fix something. But it's one of the if you guys the listeners are watching YouTube demos, one of the problems is they don't mess up, and so all of a sudden your image doesn't look like theirs, and it's hard to bridge that gap. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that, but I did when I was trying to learn watercolors, like doing a big wash on a big piece of watercolor paper and getting it smooth. Man, those people, when they're doing the demos, it just looks perfect. And then mine's all streaky, and they don't ever talk about that part of it. Like, how do you fix the mistakes? So is it possible to learn in the confines of your own bedroom because of that limitation? What do you guys think about that as a student-teacher kind of relationship?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do feel like there needs to be an element of seeing firsthand how a piece is made start to finish. And, even if you're learning from home, like that's why I think YouTube is so valuable, because there are artists who share on there, like, here's how I create things start to finish. I definitely didn't have that, but also just any sort of online course where it's a demo, a start to finish demo, like that's super, super handy to pay attention.
But if anybody is a teacher and is listening and you're doing these kind of videos, show what happens when people mess up.
Right. That is a hard thing to capture, and it is, I will admit, it is a weakness in my classes that I have on SVS. I don't know if we're ready for this level of honesty, But it's hard on for a lot of levels. One, you're, as a teacher, you're trying to show the right way to do something. One thing that does get lost in my creation of an image is just how long I have to stay in the design phase of starting another thumbnail over, another comp over, getting a thumbnail to a comp and going, it's just not as good as I want, going back to thumbnail. Sometimes the process is shorter than others. Sometimes it's longer. Sometimes it morphosizes through, even after the comp and gets into more of the finished drawing. And then that will reveal more mistakes. And I tried to put a lot of that stuff into Draw 50 Things where you can see things moving around until you get to the final drawing that I did for that class, which I actually drew like 113 objects in that image just to show anybody that 50 is nothing,
Right. Right.
Because I had students that were like, 50 is crazy, and I'm like, well, how about 113? And they're like, 113 is crazy, but 50 is even crazier, and so yeah, that's tough. And the thing that I think students need to realize over time is that you have to stay with your image, the assignment that you're working on. And it might take you 5 hours. It might take you 10 hours. It might take you 20. It might take you whatever it takes, 30, 40, 50. But the bottom line is that it shouldn't matter whether you nailed it right away or whether you had to trash drawing after drawing after drawing, so that when you finally get to the drawing that's working, you've already wasted 10 or 20 hours on stuff that didn't work. And now you're finally on to something that really is working. And that is a hard concept to learn as a student. I remember thinking, I've already spent, 8 hours on this assignment. How much should I be expected to spend? Well, how bad do you want to be a professional?
Yeah. How bad do you want a good image? I mean, you're totally right. But sometimes once you make that switch, like you'll fight for it, something's not working. You finally when you get to the point where you say, I'm just going to redo it, man, that redo goes fast and it always looks so much better the whole time. You just fix things along the way. And I'm always surprised how easy the redo is. And then I think back and it's like, why did I hold on so tightly to that first version?
Right. Yep. I mean, that's one of my favorite things to do in workshops, especially live workshops, where I sit down and I'm like, I'm just going to make a drawing for you guys. This segment is going to be me drawing. And I never nail it on the first try. It's always like, oh, that's not working. Oh, that's not working. Another piece of paper. Okay, we're getting close. Another piece of paper. All right, here we go. And that's the feedback that I get so many times. It's like, hey, it was really cool to see you struggle and how you pushed through that, and when you decided to abandon a piece and when you decided to stick with it,
Yeah.
I have to say, that was my favorite thing about teaching with you, Jake, when we were doing the both of us in the class when we first started SVS. I couldn't tell you this then because it would just make me feel so bad on what I suck at. But I was in awe with the other students of just watching how comfortable you were with failure or the potential to fail. Like you, I'm like, this guy's a god. Like he doesn't care if people watch him screw this thing up. And he knows, he's so confident, he knows he's going to get it live in front of everybody. As we're recording, as the other teacher in the room, is sitting there watching. And especially when you were doing those, I certainly couldn't have done it at that time. I can do it a little bit more now, but even the drawing part that I do, when I do my work on my compositions, I definitely need time off camera to think and to work things out. It's live, real time. I panic a little bit still.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to end up looking foolish. Yeah.
It's hard to admit that, especially on this podcast. But you know what? It's also liberating to say, I'm not. That's not one of my fortes. I can paint and color in front of anybody all day long, and I never get flustered or worry about it. But as far as the composition goes, I love the compositions I come up with. but I don't like doing them live.
Well, that's
Yeah.
okay. I mean, everybody, it doesn't have to, I always say, like, we're not trained circus animals, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
everybody's got a different strength and way they like working.
Right.
And if you're okay with that, I'm really okay with public failure. So I don't mind, because I don't know. I've just done it enough, I guess. I mean, that was one of my things in my classes. All the classes I teach live is I'd get in there and get dirty, and sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but I mean, I just like diving in there. So it
Right.
doesn't really make me too nervous to do that, but I understand
Well,
what
what
you're
scared me
talking
one
about.
time, what scared me the most was one time Jake did one that really did suck. And I'm not saying this to make a joke or anything. It really did. It was lackluster compared to what he can do.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, okay, that one sucks. And if he can suck, and that's the one that you ended up with, Jake. It was, I can't even remember which one it was. Because you've done so many that do great. But
Was it
one was just so lackluster.
the rabbit carrying the elephant? Was that the one?
No, but do you
remember.
feel insecure about that? We're going into therapy now.
I do feel insecure about that one.
It just made me go, okay, because I started to get a little like, I could do this. I could be like Jake. And then you did that one, and I was like, okay, don't even ever try.
That's too funny.
All right, so let's move on. I'm going to give you guys another favorite assignment of mine that tends to work really well. This is more specific though, so it won't work for everybody's portfolio, but it's a fun one to get things going on. This is a assignment that I got from David Hone, one of the guys I teach with a lot, and he and I used this in our illustration class at SVS, and I used it when we taught live classes, and so did he. And that is the celebrity portrait with their pets. And so the pet can be real or imagined depending on who they are, but the idea is you have to include this pet. And then so it basically became a narrative portrait, and the pet really did change the nature of drawing the celebrity because it had to kind of all work together. And the results that we got from that are always so interesting because it changes how you see a celebrity once the pet's been involved. Like, why do they have a certain pet? What's the nature of that pet? Is it, you can have like a Mike Tyson with a little poodle dog will change the nature of an image, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like it just becomes so easy to morph celebrities' images and to play around with their public perception and stuff. And we just always got really, really strong results from that. So then, once we started getting strong results from that, I looked at kind of what's the common denominator there. And it sort of goes back to the Chris Van Allsburg thing. It just introduces a new element or juxtaposes a new element that you haven't normally seen. And so if you guys are listening and you're like, oh, I don't want to do a celebrity portrait with a pet, is there a way to do an assignment that you might be working on where you introduce something that's not typical for that scene that you're working on?
Mm-hmm.
You guys
That's
ever
cool.
done? Yeah, the celebrity portrait with pets. So it's so good. I actually did a version of that when I was in school, and I did Bjork, and she had this. I can't remember if it was like I don't know, like a spirit animal or something but there was something with a bee, like a bumblebee that she was doing. And it was so much fun to have her zooming through this environment, riding this bumblebee. And it was so much fun to do. So much better than if somebody says, hey, draw a celebrity portrait of Bjork.
Yeah.
I just would have worried about the likeness,
You know what a variation of that assignment would be is just draw your self-portrait as an animal.
Like a thundercat.
Sorry. I had to, because that's what everyone's thinking that's listening is like, aren't you getting dangerously close?
Well, see, it doesn't, because there's a juxtaposition there. It's not corny. You don't want to end up in the land of corny where you're getting some weird assignment. But you're totally right, though. That is a very specific kind of assignment. If you're going to be an editorial illustrator, that's something you could get for like, maybe a New Yorker, or, I always tell students to think about where this finished piece is going to go. And does that make sense for your career? If you're going to be a kids book illustrator, that's probably a disastrous assignment to do. It won't work that well at all. But if you're going to do editorial, or you just got to think about where these things are going to end up and who's going to use them, and who would be interested in that if you're showing it as a portfolio piece.
Yeah, and I was totally kidding. I mean, like, I could see it as you're making a statement with that with that animal, someone who is ruthless, maybe they have a snake that's,
Mm-hmm.
really,
Sure.
or your example of Mike Tyson, where it's the pet is the complete opposite.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
That's
cool.
fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, go ahead, Jake.
Well, I was just going to do another assignment unless you had something else you wanted to.
I have one last assignment too, so you go ahead.
Okay.
Because I want to end strong, so I think we should end the podcast strong.
Fair enough. Okay. This assignment is draw 100 somethings is what I call it. And it's another variation. What it is, how it differs though, is I want you to take an object like a boat. If you want to do vehicles or cars or things like that, take a car or take a boat or take a spaceship or an alien or a tough guy or something like that, and draw 100 variations of that character. They don't have to be big fancy drawings, they could be small ones. But what happens is you could do 10 different boats pretty easily. You could do 20 different boat designs. It may start getting a little rough there on 19 or 20, but to go to 100, you have to push through some serious like creative blocks, and you have to like dig deep to find some out of the box thinking, like how am I going to differentiate this boat design from the last 50 boat designs? What's 51 going to look like that makes it different? And the reason that I give this assignment, it's really not a assignment I give in class, but it is an assignment that I've done myself, and it's a thing that I just tell artists you should be working on, maybe in the background of other things. So every day do a few designs, and over the course of a year you could finish this thing. And the people who have done it, myself included, are always amazed at how there really is no barrier once you figure out a way to get through it. So what'll happen is you get to, design number 30 and you're like, that's it, I'm out of ideas. And you tuck it away for a week. And while you're out there, you're, walking around, experiencing life, driving down the street or something, you'll see like some object that'll spark an idea, and you'll think, oh, I should do like a tuba boat. Like, what would a boat look like if it was half tuba? And then you sit down and you're like, oh, this, that sparks another 10 ideas. And by the end of it, you realize, okay, there's really no limit. Like, you cannot tap the creativity here. You can't tap it out. There is
what would a Thundercat boat look like?
Exactly. Or what would a boat as yourself as an animal look like?
And now it's funny because through this podcast, I'm getting a sense of what it would be like in your classes. And I know if I'm in Jake's class, I'm going to be drawing a lot of things.
A lot of stuff.
Yep. Start out with 50 hands, and then I'm drawing 100 boats.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things.
Well, and Jake, I saw you do this assignment, and didn't you start out with 50 at first?
I did 100. I did the 100, but then I did another second 100. So
okay, so that's what it was.
Total.
I thought it was 50 and 50. I've been telling people wrong. So it was 100, and then you did. So you were probably going to finish that in your story, and I just kind of.
No, I was just going to leave it at that. But yeah, that's a good point. Is I did this myself, and when I got to 100, I thought, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I'll do another 100, and so I ended up doing 200. And what I was designing was it was basically like a robot alien type of character, and how many different body variations I could do of that, where it still felt like it was the same species, I guess. But what I ended up thinking is what different niche could each of these designs fill. Like, I've got one who's has an antenna on the top of its head, so it's a radio antenna character. Well, what would its counterpart be? Well, maybe there's a satellite one, so I designed one that looked like a satellite that would fly in the sky over it. And when I did like the tuba one, I did a tuba version of it, right? I thought, well, what other instruments could I do? So I did one that was like a punk rock version, and he has speakers like built into his design, and just stuff like that. It was a lot of fun, and it made me realize again, like when you sit down to do designs, don't your first your first handful don't have to be what's it. Like there's gonna be more. There can be more, and don't stop until you push through and you actually like almost break it. Like
Right.
you get it to
You
the
start
point
getting
where
sort of absurd and then go past that and go past
Mhm,
that. And yeah, that's
right.
great. That's really good. Hey, Will, before you give your last one, since we wanted to end on the strong one, I have another art school pet peeve that I wanted to throw out there. This one's a
Wait,
big
before
pet
you
peeve.
say your pet peeve,
Okay,
I just want to draw a parallel too here.
go
So
ahead.
Will said Jake's so confident in drawing, he's not worried about messing up because he's going to find that final drawing. And Lee said, I realized if you're in my class, you're going to be doing a lot of drawing. And I think that's what's going on there is um, I honestly feel like the best way to get good at drawing is to do so many drawings that you don't care about drawing anymore, that drawing just doesn't become like this stressful thing. Like you've done so
Yeah.
many
Right.
that it's almost like I mean, you run, right? And Will, you've played probably so many games of racquetball that you're not stressing about like starting a game of racquetball. You're to the
Right.
point now where you're like strategizing and thinking, how am I going to tear this guy down? What are the 5 different ways I could tear this guy down? Right? It's not a stress thing. And the same thing with running. It's like when you first start out running, the first time you ever run 5 miles, you're like, I can't believe I ran 5 miles. But after you've done a marathon, 5 miles is no big deal. Like that's a warm up, right? And so I think it's the same with drawing. After you've done thousands of drawings, when you sit down to do a drawing, you're not stressed about whether or not you're going to get a good drawing at the end of it. Okay,
Right.
I've for the 1,000 good drawings I've done 10,000 bad drawings, and I know what it takes to get through that and get to that good one.
That's a
Okay.
good point. Good.
Good stuff.
That is definitely a good point to bring up. You've desensitized yourself to that anxiety that comes with starting a new drawing, basically, because you've started so many.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. All right, here's
Okay,
my
what's your pet peeve?
art school pet peeve. This one comes up a lot, and I wrote it in bold. I just didn't have it on my screen at the time. Art school pet peeve: when teachers give a conceptual assignment at the same time they're giving a technical assignment. For example, like come up with a fairy tale. Write a new fairy tale on your own. You're going to do an illustration of a fairy tale, and you're going to do it in oil, even though you've never painted in oil.
Oh, yeah.
That happened
One
over and
thing at a
over.
time.
It's just
Yeah.
funny because once you realize that learning is so hard. If you can't control the medium, the chances of you getting a good illustration are like slim to none. And so I always divide my classes up into, am I trying to learn the technical side of this thing, or am I trying to come up with content? And those are 2 very, very different things. Not that they don't overlap somewhat, but I always had my students, when I'm doing a technical class where we're learning a medium, we would start out with everybody would just paint the ball. They would always paint a ball first, a lit ball with a shadow. And, you're starting out with acrylic, you're starting out in oil, pastel, whatever, digital, whatever you're doing. We'd always start with that, because if you can't paint that simple thing, why do I want you to do a fairy tale if you can't paint a ball? And so you just need to distinguish that. Don't stack too many things up.
Those ball assignments are lit.
Oh, Jake's been by himself in the studio for too long.
We didn't finish this podcast soon enough.
Let's end on that note.
Anyway, be careful if you're trying to learn technical stuff. Learn the technical stuff. Don't worry about the content too much. Just be sure that you can execute, and then get soft shadows or soft edges if you need a soft edge, or a hard edge if you need a hard edge. But don't combine those things together, because it's just going to be a mess, and you're not going to learn what you need to learn. Will, do you agree with that or disagree?
Agree. I don't like I don't like putting too many limitations on students, because it's like, and I get why a student or a teacher would want to load an assignment with, I'm going to have them learn this, that, and by the end they're going to learn all these things all at once, because you only have a limited amount of time with your students.
Right.
but yeah, you can overload.
Yeah, so they're not really getting either. They're not getting a good illustration conceptually, and then they're not executing well technically.
And the problem is, I think for a student, the only way you can stay with an assignment and give it the amount of time that it really needs is if you're falling in love with it as you're doing it. So if it's becoming a disaster because you can't control the medium, you don't want to stay with it. You don't want to go through the last,
right,
the 80% of the massage of finishing up that.
Yeah,
that
and
image.
if you want to have a lot of fun with illustration, your technical side of stuff. This is going to reinforce kind of what Jake was saying earlier. But your technical side of the illustration needs to be so good that you don't have to think about it at all anymore. For example, like when my son comes home, I'm working on this book, and he comes home and he'll come in and just talk to me, and I'll talk to him for like an hour while I'm painting, or me and Jake were both drawing during the last podcast. I don't have to think about the drawings part anymore, or the painting part once I've got a couple things blocked in, and that's where it gets really, really fun. And so I don't know if a lot of people realize that, like, once the technical side has been achieved, at least to a certain degree, then it's all about content, and that's when I really get into the flow of things, because I'm not worried about controlling the thing that you're holding, whether that's a paintbrush or a stylus or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, Will, take us out. Tell us this amazing final assignment.
This one's actually going to be horrible.
Uh-oh.
That way you can only go up from here. So the problem, before I tell the assignment, is that students often don't create good compositions. So this is going back to the idea of creating a good composition. We're talking going beyond a single character design,
mm-hmm.
but designing an environment with characters and objects and things like that. And so the problem that I identified in my students is that it's just counterintuitive to design a great image. So the draw 50 things is one way of doing it. That's a huge assignment. A smaller assignment that I give on the way up to that bigger one is called stealing a composition. And
mm-hmm.
so what I've done is, when I first gave you the assignment, you talked early on, Lee, about assignments that failed. So this was first a failed assignment that I turned into a successful one. And I said, to my students, go find a really good composition, and we're going to steal that composition and make it our own. Well, of course, you can probably already predict that if you can't draw a good composition, sometimes you can't identify one. So I had students bring in crappy compositions that they wanted to steal, and I'm like, that's not worth stealing. So the idea, what the assignment was that I came up with, is I found really good compositions, and I would explain why they were good, and we would look at the all the rules that were being followed and all the design principles, and then we would exaggerate the. You can do this in Photoshop or Procreate or some other program where you can just do it with tracing paper, but you identify the silhouettes. So you identify the dark areas and the light, and you take the medium tones and either make a decision and make them light or dark. So you come up with basically a black and white blob of the composition, of a good composition. And then if it's an exterior scene, then you have to change it to an interior scene. And if it's an interior, you have to change it to an exterior. So you basically, where the character is, you can identify where the character is. You're going to change that character blob, and maybe it's a well-defined character in the composition. You're going to use that character as a placeholder to put your character, a totally different character, totally different environment. Uh-huh. But you're following this outline that's been given to you. And it's akin to learning anything where you do drills. If you were learning how to do layups in basketball, the coach has you line up in a certain place, and there's you're following in the footsteps of people who've done it great. Take off on the opposite foot that you're laying up with your arm. There's mechanics involved, and so you're following these things. And so that's basically what it is it's a foolproof way of creating a good composition, because all the space division has already been done for you.
That's great. I like that one. Did it yield good results?
Oh yeah. It was great. And I think it really helped the students because they felt like it was their piece at the end of the day, which it was, because no one would look at their illustration and say, you copied that from this.
Right.
You know, I mean, they're
Mhm.
like, I think Jake, you said one time in one of our classes that in your mind, there's only a few basic composition layouts in your, that you kind of, don't you kind of like Rolodex them through your mind and go,
Right.
for this assignment, I'm going to pick that one.
Right.
And
Exactly.
you already kind of have this mental picture in your mind. So it kind of does that in a way. It kind of gives them one of those images to then burn into their brain and go, this works.
And
That's great.
That goes back to a point that I've been making a lot. I've been doing some speaking lately, public speaking in regards to Inktober. So I've been visiting schools and things like that. And one of the things I bring up too, it's like if you've learned an instrument, say piano, those early lessons, the teacher didn't sit you down and say, all right, here's a piano. Now make a song, just make a song from your heart. Whatever inspires you, just make a song, right? And nobody teaches piano that way. You don't you don't learn piano
Right.
by just making stuff up. And
Just make it.
so often that's how art education is treated. Like,
Yeah.
here's a pencil, here's a paintbrush, you know what all the colors are, now go make something, go paint or create whatever comes from your heart. And really what happens is you spend years playing other people's songs, and you learn more basic songs, and you go up and up and up until you can play a piece by Beethoven or Für Elise or something like that. And then you might feel like you have something within you to actually write a piece of music, if that's what you want to do with your training. And what's interesting with my kids, they're in piano too, is they learn a song, and one of them in particular, she'll learn a song and then she'll make up a piece of music that kind of is based on that song, what she learned from that song. And I think that's exactly how art training works, is you learn a principle, you copy a master, you do a master study, or you learn, here's exactly how I want you to do a perspective drawing. You learn what you need to learn from that, and then you go and you make your own piece with that new knowledge that you have. And I think that's what you need to do with all these assignments is take what you've done, what you've needed to learn from that piece, and then go make your own art, really make something from your heart, that no one else could have made, based on your experiences, based on the way your brain connects things. And that's where you start to build your own style and your own voice. And that's where you can actually start to make make a portfolio of your work, not student work, not your not your amateur stuff, but stuff that really could only come from you.
That's awesome. That's funny that you use that analogy, because I do that all the time when I'm teaching. And I also add, I think the music one's a great way to explain that. But I also, in sports, all the training that leads up to greatness is kind of regimented too. You'd never go into a karate studio as a new student and him just say, put on the outfit and be like, okay, express yourself through kicks and punches. They teach you the moves all the way up through the black belt, and then you start expressing yourself, through movement. And dance is the same way. Art is the only one out of all these things that does that move that you're talking about, that gives the beginner just free reign with no technical control, no boundaries, and just says, be yourself. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It's so weird too, because I mean, like writing, you don't just turn students loose. You learn all these rules. In music, you learn, you play someone else's music. And sports is like, I mean, there's a lot of art in sports. You run other people's plays.
Mm-hmm.
It's just weird. That's like, here's a piece of paper, blank paper, go create something.
Yeah, and then the general consensus is if you do anything else, like a lot of schools, discourage the looking at masterworks and using other people's images even as a starting point, because we're supposed to create something from scratch, and you're kind of creating in a vacuum, and they encourage that in a weird way, and they discourage the learning from all these other avenues and looking at other people's work and appropriating things in ways that stimulate your own creativity. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
I think that has to do with the shift away from representational art in the 20th century into more, abstract or these different art forms that were more about emotion and more
Totally
about
agree. Yeah.
what the artist what the artist is trying to say with their art. And I think education followed suit with that as well to some degree. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, should we wrap it up?
Let's wrap it up. That was fun.
All right. Thanks,
Put a
Lee.
bow
That was
on
good. Put a bow on it. All right. So thanks for joining us, everybody. 3-Point Perspective is made possible by SVSLearn.com, where becoming a great illustrator starts. And your hosts have been Will Terry, Lee White, and Jake Parker. You can find Will Terry's work at willterry.com, and he's on Instagram at willterryart. Lee White is leewhiteillustration.com. That's his website. And you can find his work on Instagram at leewhiteillo. I'm Jake Parker. My website's mrjakeparker.com, and you can find me on Instagram at Jake Parker. Podcast is edited by Alex Sugg. That's Sugg with 2 G's, and his website is alexsugg.com. Podcast is produced by Tanner Garlick, and you can find his work at tannergarlickart.com. Garlic is spelled with a L-I-C-K. It's not just a C. So if you like this episode, you liked these assignments, you want to tell other people about what you learned here today, we would appreciate that. Share this episode, get the word out, subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet on iTunes or whatever podcasting app that you use. And if there's a place to leave a review, please leave a review. We love to hear what people think. And we actually have this discussion posted in the SVSLearn.com forums. There's a thread for this discussion. So if you have something you want to add to this, please log on to those forums. They're free to join. It's actually just a delightful community of artists and very supportive of each other's work and people learning. So go to SVSLearn.com, click on forum, and find the thread for this particular episode and chime in over there and let us know what you think. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Hey, wouldn't Tanner be a great chef name?
Yeah. Tanner Garlick.
I just think it would be awesome.
What should he name his kids?
Butter.
Oh, that's a good one. Like
Butter
pickle.
Butter and garlic. And we stopped recording.
Nope, I'm going to hit stop.